Hey, it's your buddy Pete, and we are trying to go live again here for another show. Back-to-back shows today because we had to squeeze someone in, and they're late. You know, you book things, you take a drink of water, say, what do we got to do around here? Well, we'll be nice to Austin, and we'll say, look at this, Austin Kleon. His book is called Steal Like an Artist. Here he is. All right.
Sorry, are you recording video today?
Yeah, and we're live. We went live at 11 o'clock.
Oh gosh, you're live. All right.
Yeah.
Not get that.
Well, you know, all I can do is write the words, man. I don't know. I just write them. Let's move forward. So your name is Austin Kleon. So I want you to say, hey, this is Austin Kleon, and you're watching the Break It Down show at your leisure.
Hey, this is Austin Kleon, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Steal Like an Artist is the book, and I'm excited to talk to you about it. I love books like this, Austin, because not to do anything. I say it to be funny. These are like shitter books, right? And you sit down and it gives you a thought. You can sit there and be like, you know what? Like, look, those Harvey Penick books from the early 90s. Those were great. His little philosophies about golf and everything. And I think it's a great format. I've always wanted to write a book like this. I unlike you, I have not written my shitter book yet, but I'd like to.
I mean, it's a compliment to me. I mean, I consider James Joyce's Ulysses a shitter book. So, you pick it up, dip into it. When you're finished, you put it back on the commode. So,
yeah. No, it's a great thing. You know, instead of having some dumb like watching a TikTok video. Not that there's anything wrong with that. You're taking a crap, but I like stuff like this, right? And I've got my finger in part of the book that I want to talk to you about here in a moment. But before we do that, I noticed that you have a Joy Division shirt on.
well, it's a hipster Texas dad version of it. If you notice, if you look very closely, they're Texases.
Oh, okay.
Because I live in Austin, so
Yeah.
so it's the Pulsar with Texas. Texas is plural.
It's fine. It's fine because you see a lot of versions of that shirt, and just to even know like what it is, you know, that shirt is probably the most covered shirt from a band of all time, probably.
It puts you in a club if you can identify it, right?
Yeah. Now, are you hip to Joy Division at all, or no?
I am hip to the Joy Division, yes. Although I am someone who thinks that Joy Division's purpose was to become New Order, which is controversial, but
well,
we can talk about that if you want.
Yeah, I think we have to. So let me put my finger. Let me put the ribbon. By the way, also a shitter book highlight when you have the ribbon for the book. So
yeah, excellent. You can keep your place.
Yeah, I love Joy Division. I love New Order more.
Yeah, I mean, I think the caveat to that is like they had more time to do good stuff, So, but if it's like the Perfect Kiss versus, although it's the best is to make like a mix and to let it segue. That's a great like mix to make. You start out with the Joy Division stuff, and then it ends up with New Order.
Yeah.
First, then the question becomes, when do you stop?
Yeah,
because you might want to stop at a certain point.
When I saw New Order recently, and they've had the same show for a number of years, because I mean, honestly, why would you change it? They're not known for like we had Bruce Dickinson from Iron Maiden on, and we know that we're going to see some crazy artistic expression of like, here comes Eddie, and there's going to be some different things with New Order. You got maybe have Bernard like moving around, maybe playing some different instruments. But there's not a whole lot of different things, right? It's the images that
was Hooky with him, or was he? I mean, he's been gone for a while. Yeah, I mean that's really funny about New. I mean, they're a bunch of dorks, so
right.
That's what's so fun. Like if you watch the Perfect Kiss video or something, which is one of my favorite videos of all time. Yeah. I mean, even Peter Hook looks like a dork in that video because he's wearing sweatpants and a leather jacket.
Yeah. Or they'll just hire, an artist and go like, hey, we don't need to be in this. Let's, make some like that one of the people slapping each other. I can't think of which song that is, but it has
Oh, yeah.
that down, 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 that whole beat that was hot, 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 hot in the late 80s. Down, 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 down,
Yeah.
you know, kind of thing.
Well, that's kind of the Kraftwerk approach, right? Just send the robots out at the end of the show, and you can stay backstage and
Yeah.
work on your bicycle.
I cannot think of the lady that plays keys for them, but I don't know that
Oh,
she's
no, she's pretty cool. Well, she's married to
right.
the drummer. They're
Uh-huh.
they're married, so they're really cute if you watch an interview with them.
But you never hear her ever say a word on stage. She's there just like head down, working on those keys, driving the party, you know?
Probably trying to avoid the nerd she's in the band with.
But New Order and Hooky, they both do and rightfully so, a Joy Division set, right?
Yeah.
It'll be an encore or whatever it is. And I
Yeah.
love that they do that. And then they get to cherry pick the truly best things because there's some stuff from Joy Division that isn't like you don't get to hit a home run every time you step to the plate, right? They have great, incredible stuff. The body of work as it flows together is great, but they get to pick the 5 songs that really matter. And even then, 5 songs from
Yeah.
their limited catalog is incredible.
Well, I mean, they only made 2 records, and
Right.
then, they couldn't have been much past 20 when they did that stuff.
Right.
So,
And you're saddled with the guy that's deeply depressed, you know, suicidally depressed.
yeah.
And that makes it hard to get out of that box. And you know, you are limited by that, right? Like even like he's not well, a shitty example now, but not Chris Cornell. He didn't have like multi-octave range or anything. He had kind of a vibe.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I like to make Joy Division fans really angry when I point out how much they're inspired by the Doors, because the like Doors fandom and Joy Division fandom are not necessarily a Venn diagram.
Yeah.
And so if I want to troll Joy Division fans, I point out how much Ian Curtis loved Jim Morrison. And once you hear that, now the really interesting thing to me was I was one of the best Joy Division songs, Love Will Tear Us Apart. When they were recording that record, they were listening to Sparks, Number One in Heaven, and they were listening to Frank Sinatra's Greatest Hits.
Yeah.
So the next time you listen to Love Will Tear Us Apart, play some Frank Sinatra and some Sparks afterwards, and you can hear it. That's the way back into Steal Like an Artist.
Yeah, but I'm not going to take that in. I want to stay on New Order
Oh,
a minute
okay.
long.
Sure.
But they did a lot more than that too. Like, you know, when you listen to Traffic and Kraftwerk and those bands that came before them, you know, they didn't even gently lift. They're like, we're taking this, we're taking that. And there's not just influence, but there's full on like this. We love what they're doing. We're going to do it also.
Yeah, like Blue Monday has a sample right out of Radioactivity by Kraftwerk. And then, of course, they're listening to Marauder and those Donna Summer tracks and all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know? So it's a good, like, they're I think they were really good at sort of cultivating their influences,
Yeah.
in that way that, that DJ culture is coming up, it's all like in the air at that time, in the 80s. So yeah, I would say New Order Substance, like that collection that's pretty tops for me. That would be on that might be on a desert island list for me.
It's and it's a double album too, right? Is that right?
Yeah. I think all the weird like 12 inches are on the second part.
Yeah.
On the second CD.
I always mean to do this, but I never do it. But I want to write. Maybe it'll be a shitter book on like the bands that need to be in the Rock Hall of Fame. And there's no reason why New Order is not already in, other than the fact that that's a whole corporate thing. And I'm not talking down about it. Someone gets to do this. They did it. It's their gig, but New Order needs to be in the Hall of Fame. I mean, it's silly. Like when you have, I don't know, what do they have? 25 fantastic hits. And there's so many bands that don't even have that. Like they just have hit at, like, you may like Perfect Kiss. I may like Love Vigilantes. The next person may love Blue Monday. And we'd all be like, yeah, that's reasonable. I mean, they're
all good. Yeah.
off the top of my head, right?
Well, I feel like the Rock Hall is pretty prejudiced against. It seems like they're pretty prejudiced against electronic music. I mean, I think Kraftwerk just made it in.
Finally,
Um,
for years and years.
yeah,
I
but
think they were like one of those like pioneer categories, not even like
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So
And
I don't
like
know. I mean, it's interesting as someone who wasn't really alive during that. I mean, wasn't old enough to be into that on the
right,
first wave. It's just it's interesting when you listen to that stuff in hindsight, how much that's been gobbled up by, you know, all sorts of musicians now.
yeah,
You know, just that how revolutionary that was at the time. You know, I think about like when Depeche Mode is started bringing in like guitars for Violator. You know, that's a very yeah, you know, it's just that whole mix of guitar and synthesizer and stuff. It's just really interesting to me how kind of forward thinking that was at the time, and now how it's just like ubiquitous. You know,
yeah. What isn't synthesized? You know, like it's all played through a button machine of some kind, right?
oh, that's true. Now, yeah, everything is digitized.
Yeah, they
The
don't even use
recording,
keys anymore. You know, like even that's like, yeah, we don't need that crap.
yeah.
Um, it's incredible what you can do with music, and the Joy Division and New Order conversation is it's a good one to have because it gives me a sense of who you are as an artist. How do you okay, so if your musical brain wasn't turned on when all that stuff is happening, how do you arrive at Joy Division? That's not an easy path.
Well, you know, I think that I think most people with music they do what my friend Alan Jacobs says is you swim upstream. I mean, like if people my age growing up where I grew up, you know, like your first exposure to punk rock was probably Green Day. Then you listen to Green Day and you get really into Green Day and you buy every Green Day record. And then they mention some band called the Ramones in like
Right.
you know, in an interview. Then you're like, well, what are the Ramones like? And then you listen to the Ramones, right? And then you're like, well, you know, what are what other bands were like the Ramones? And then you find the CBGB scene, you know, and then you know, so it's like very I think that's one of the really fun things about music in particular is it's very easy to trace lineage. Like it's very easy to trace influence. And it's kind of easy to figure out what people are influenced by. Like it's not too much of a leap to go from like Green Day to the Clash to a reggae, you know, and so uh it's just I that's one thing I've always loved about music, and I've always sort of asked you know, I'm always encouraging people to think about books like they might think about music in that sense because I think people are very teed up to think about music that way, but they don't necessarily think about books that way because it's not so viscerally immediate when you read a book like who an author is inspired by. You know, when you listen to music, like it's very you can very quickly viscerally figure out, okay, this sounds like this and this sounds like this. But when you dip into a book, it's a little bit more subtle, you know.
It can be a lot more subtle too, where you're
Oh, for
like,
sure.
who in the world, you know, and then you go on the journey of wait, like Bono's good at this. You can tell what Bono's reading because it'll make it into his lyrics. And you're like, oh my gosh, he read this. If you know about it, you know, or he reveals it in some way.
Right, right.
But if you don't know it and that lyric belongs to some other line and he's totally changed it, then you've got to go out and suss that out, figure out why he made that choice.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny now because Radiohead is sort of like a
Mm.
again, if you're my age, it's kind of a joke. Oh, old dad's into Radiohead and
Right.
but at the time when Radiohead came out, they were using the web in a very interesting way in that they were really being open about their influences. So I can remember being a teenager and reading their blogs and reading their websites and you know, Tom York might mention some book he's reading, and then I would go to the library and get that book, or you know, Johnny would say, "Oh, we were listening to lots of the White Album and Bitches Brew," and I'm like, "Well, what's that?" You know, looking that,
Yeah.
you know, that kind of thing. And so, like, I feel like a lot. I actually think a lot of those '90s bands, or the really good ones, I felt like were pretty good at pointing backwards. So I think that was sort of an influence on me. Like I think about like with Nirvana, you know, like Kurt Cobain wearing a Daniel Johnston t-shirt or bringing the Meat Puppets on stage with them for
Right.
live in New York. You know, so it's like they I feel like the 90s were the good bands were good at like pointing backwards to their influences, and they sort of knew that they were a gateway drug, right? Because like a lot of those 90s bands are taking an old sound and kind of spinning it,
No.
that kind of thing. So
And being from a generation just ahead of you, I would say some of that influence is born through the Police and Sting, and he's like
mm.
talking about Nabokov and
Yeah,
Mistopheles, and
that's
like
true.
I don't even know what the word you said, and you couldn't always get the lyrics. Like you had to be like,
That's
"Hmm,"
yeah. I
you know,
forgot that he drops a Nabokov
yeah, right.
reference.
And
That's
there's all
interesting.
kinds of like references that he uses, Devil in the Deep Blue Sea, and all of these things that come from somewhere else. You realize it's a really literate, well-read guy. And then of course you want to be literate and I also understand what the hell he's talking about, because it's not just a love song. It's like it's a love song and it brings you into, whatever the image he wants you to have is. And for sure, a guy like, well, I mean, any of those guys, Tom York for sure listens to the Police.
Well, I mean, that's what I think is really interesting about music is that musicians are sort of like multimedia as far as like what inspires them. I mean, I think all artists to a certain extent, like they devour a lot of stuff from different mediums and stuff. But like when you're a musician, particularly in pop music, you're looking for lyrics. You're listening for lyrics. You're listening for sound, of course, and chords and stuff to borrow. But you're also looking for images because you're looking for artwork and you're looking for you have to do a video or that kind of thing. So it is like a very multimedia endeavor being a rock band. And so it's very like it's fun the way that I have this kind of theory that a lot of art is either centrifugal or centripetal, in that it either kind of sucks you in to itself or it
Mhm.
spins you out to other stuff. And
Um,
most of my favorite rock bands are sort of centrifugal in the sense that they really spin you outwards to lots of different stuff, and they're really kind of transparent about their influences, and they sort of become a portal to discovering other kinds of music.
no, I love that. I want to stay on mute. I mean, you're hitting all kinds of things that are in your book too, and I love that. Um, but I want to stay on music because there's a thing that we did that kind of inspires this activity that you got the tail end of, and I got, like we sat down with an album and if they had liner notes, all the better. Like the
Yeah.
bands that had great liner notes, you're just like, please, more liner notes, right?
uh
And CDs tried, but then it got too small, and you're like, I can't read all this stuff, and it wasn't artistically based. If that you follow what I'm saying, but we do these things called album fights here on the show,
Oh,
and so
okay.
we'll take two similarly tracked albums. We can break the rules sometimes, but like two 11-track albums, two 10-track albums, and we score the rounds, song one versus song one, and then you
Oh,
get a boxing match, right? So
yeah.
round five versus round five, and it's all scored like 10-point must boxing, and so you go through and you listen to these songs, and I'm a stickler. Like I don't want 10-10 tie rounds. I want you to like this is art. I want you to really dive in and pick a nit. Find a nit that sticks out for you. Like I'm going to take that one off, and I don't like that. Right? Like if the mix is bad and the bass is too far back, say it. Say yeah. You know what? And then you can read about the production. Like sure enough, Hookie's pissed. He was too far back in the mix. You're like I found something that Hookie found. You know and I just use
Yeah.
him as an example because there is a time where he's like, I hate this mix, and these things break up bands and they cause all kinds of problems. So you go through and you listen to these songs, one song, two song, like Purple Rain and Thriller have the same number of tracks, right?
Oh, well, that's
And so
not even close to me. I would just tell you right away it's Purple Rain, but
let me, I'll there's no surprises. You can go listen to the episode. Purple Rain dominates Thriller because Thriller
yeah.
has a bunch of pop in it that doesn't stand up to what Prince was doing.
Yeah. I mean, everything on Purple Rain is um is incredible, and I really like that record because Prince is really trying to become a superstar. Like he's being intentional. Like Purple Rain, there's a great story that he actually, he called Steve Perry and the guys in Journey and said, "Hey, I wrote this song. Like, do you guys care?" Like, because he obviously took it from faithfully. Yeah, it's the
Right.
same chord progression. And they were like, "Sure, man, whatever." But it's interesting because Michael Jackson actually that I don't think that's the same. I don't think Beat It is on or Billy is Billie Jean on Thriller?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so Billie Jean is another lift. Billie Jean is he took it from Hall& and Oates. I can't go for that. Boom, 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 boom,
Mhm.
boom, 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 boom,
Yeah.
boom, boom, boom. And he went up to one of the Hall or the Oates, Daryl Hall or whatever, one of them, and said, "Hey, I'm really sorry. I stole the bass line for Billie Jean for from you guys." And dudes
Yeah.
were like, "Oh, that's okay. We stole it from someone else." It's like,
Yeah. Well, Daryl Hall's great about that. I don't know if you ever
yeah.
his live from Daryl House show. He's like,
Hall& and Oates, I mean, like, I didn't really know much about Hall& and Oates, but, you put on some of those all old Hall& and Oates tracks, they hit. Like, there's some funky stuff going. I Some of those hits I really enjoy.
yeah, they're a world class band. I mean, when you want to have a real conversation about the most successful bands, and I'm saying successful for a reason, the most successful American bands of all time, uh, they're in that conversation. You could talk about the Peppers; they're still an 80 stadium level act. You can talk about the Eagles, and for some reason, everybody hates those bands. You can talk about Aerosmith, but you better be sure you discuss the merits of Hall and Oates because they got. I think they've got more top 10 hits than any of those
I
bands.
can say unequivocally that I would rather listen to Hall& and Oates than any of those other bands. So,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm I'm right there.
You like a little soul music, nothing wrong with that. And then Earth, Wind& and Fire would be in that list, but you're
Oh,
talking
sure.
about the biggest bands that we've ever. And the thing you realize then is America does solo artists better than they do bands.
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I do think on the whole, Americans don't like group. Like Americans love the individual. I mean, that's built into the mythology. So Americans love singular pop stars in a sense. That's an interesting. I would like to dive into that. That would be something fun to research because even in the 60s, like a lot of those great groups came from England, and a lot of those English groups were taking American music and repurposing it,
Right.
specifically black music from
Right.
America, and repackaging it. um and it's funny how many of those great British bands were art school kids, like the Kinks or even the Rolling Stones. Like Mick Jagger was in art school, John Lennon was in art school.
Right.
There was something about British art schools in the 60s or late 50s that cranked these dudes out. That's a great thing. I'm going to think about that today because I think you're right. I think that's actually a thing in the publishing industry. Um, the kiss of death for a book is really supposed to be if it's co-authored. Like co-authored books always do a little bit um they're a harder sell than a book done by a singular person, to the extent that you'd probably be better off making up a pseudonym.
Right. Right.
um but
Even
yeah,
though
that's an interesting
ghost
question.
authored books are some of the most successful books that we have. And it makes sense. Like whoever it's going to be that writes the book, Barack Obama. All right, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. He wrote that book himself. I doubt it.
Yes.
I mean, honestly, like he hires someone because he needs.
No, I think I think Obama, I mean, because you have to remember Obama was a writer before he was president.
Right.
So, I mean, I think he can actually write. I think
I'm not
that's
saying you
one.
can't write. I'm just saying that you have other things to do. Like, hey, Barack, we'd like you to come do this for $1 million today. And he's like,
Oh,
oh
sure.
yeah, you know what? Yeah,
Well,
I don't.
yeah, he has speechwriters and stuff. Sure.
Right. Yeah. So you have like not that you lack the capability, and I've had a couple artists and authors on before, like who talk about this. Like, yeah, you reach a point. Like we had a comedian on the other day. He's like, yeah, Whoopi doesn't write her own jokes anymore because she's Whoopi. She's got other things to do. Doesn't have time to do the creative stuff. And if she did, she had to practice. Right. And so
Right.
Bette Midler hires a joke writer because, and this is all
Yeah.
Bruce Blanche, right? And he's like, you have to
Mhm.
hire someone like me because I know your style. I know what you need. I write jokes better than you do at this point. And besides, I cost less than you do. So you go make big money and then pay me and then we'll all work it out,
Yeah.
But you're
Well,
right, though, there is a book with multiple authors. The prime author is usually, like, bolded out, and you might even miss the fact that it's co-written a lot of times too.
yeah, I'm trying to think of yeah, but that's just something in the industry. That's a good point though. I mean, Americans do like they're very, they're very like it's built into the mythology of the country
Yeah.
that the lone individual, you know. Um and that's that.
Alright. I'm looking at your book. By the way, everybody should get this book. It's a really good let me get over here. Steal Like an Artist. It's, one of the quote I love this quote from RZA. "Whether I went to school or not, I would always study," right? And this is the thing, when you're creating things, I'm always looking at references, and I read something and I'm like, oh, that's I'll do an album fight and I'm like, you know what, there's a song here that I hear, and I'm not listening to that song and I cannot think of a song's name when another song is playing, but I'm listening and I'm like, there's something in this, and next thing I know, I'm at Otis Redding, who I'm not into, but we've heard his songs and I'm like, there's Otis Redding in this song, and then you listen and you check it, I don't even know which song it is, and then you go back and you discover it and you're like, oh my God. And so now I realize there's an influence from Otis Redding all the way to this, whatever this song is going to be by Journey or whoever it is. Right. And
Mhm.
so always studying. So how do you do that on a day-to-day basis?
Oh, I mean, I think it's built into the work at this point. I mean, I'm always looking for simply by the nature of my work, I'm always looking for something new to dive into, and I'm sort of a perpetual student at this point, because it so much of the work of the writer is diving into things that you absolutely have no idea about,
Yeah.
and you're trying to get up to speed pretty quickly and be a quick study, as they say. And specifically for me, I think because part of my work is doing the books, but part of my work is also sort of having a blog and having a newsletter and sort of having an ongoing relationship with my audience and sort of being a person who kind of picks good stuff for them to kind of get, or be exposed to. So I in turn have to be like exposed to new stuff, and I think the way that I do that, the best way that I do that is I follow unique individuals who have good tastes that align with mine, and I sort of stay up to date on what they're into. And whenever our Venn diagrams sort of overlap, I'll pick something out of there, and that's when I know it's like something to explore. But I think one of the things that I love about being just just a person who's interested in the world and gets to write about it is you just never know what subjects you're not interested in you'll later get interested in. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what I love about being a writer. Like, I just got into skateboarding. I don't skateboard, but I got interested in skateboarding after I watched the Tony Hawk documentary, and I
Mm.
became obsessed with Rodney Mullen.
Yeah. Right. You
So
should. He's
yeah,
incredible.
yeah. So I got Rodney's book and like watched other videos with him, and so that's just a and then skateboarding. I get very interested in skateboarders are very good at taking a kind of harsh reality and turning it into their playground. That's what they do. They kind of take these harsh environments and these dilapidated. Like I'm very interested in the fact that skateboarders in the 80s figure and even recently with the economic downturns take old empty pools and turn them into ramps and stuff like the empty Southern California pool.
Yeah.
It has a real story to play in the history of skateboarding. So it's just like stuff like that because I see a real creativity at work there. Sort of looking at the world and there are people who accept the world for what it is and use it the way it's supposed to be used. And then there's people like skateboarders who look at the world and say, well, we're going to take this thing that's kind of useless or ugly to other people and we're going to make it our playground, because I think that's really what the artist does. The artist finds things in the culture that are either sort of overlooked or junk or people aren't paying attention to, and they take that and they make it their playground.
Right. Right.
So
Have you seen any of Stacy Peralta's films or even their documentary about the boys of Dogtown, everything?
yeah, I watched the Bones Brigade documentary. I need to watch the Dogtown one. I have a book with the fella who he did a bunch of Black Flag photography. I forget his Friedman, Gun Friedman. So I have a book of their stuff, but I'm kind of a magpie, so I'm always like flittering to this part or the next. But the Bones Brigade documentary is actually, I thought, so I have a theory that I stole from Brian Eno. There's like kind of two ways to think about creativity, and this touches on what we talked about before. There's the idea that creativity is the province of the lone genius, the great superhumanly talented person.
Right.
And they're up here, we're down here. They have the connection, they do the work, they give it to us, and we're fans and we cheer and we're out in the audience. It's like, oh great, like they're like gods. There's another way of thinking about creativity that Brian Eno calls scenius. And under scenius, there are people who do great work, but they're usually surrounded by a network of other people who they're stealing and sharing with, and they're
Right.
building a whole scene. So that Bones Brigade documentary, I thought, was a very great example of like the power of a scenius. What happens when there's Stacy Peralta in the middle, and he's building this team, but all these guys become a kind of like they start influencing each other, and
Yeah.
it becomes this whole world.
Yeah, it's a neat thing to think about, that Senius idea. I've heard him talk about that too. And you're talking about Brian. Will you say Brian Eno or did you say Daniel Lanois? I always forget.
Brian Eno. Yeah, that's the
He
yeah.
doesn't really know bounds. I mean, he worked with Bowie, and if Bowie was like, let me just say this in a different way. When I was we were interviewing Andy Summers from the Police, right?
Mhm.
And I said, you're doing all this stuff, and you always are like pushing things artistically. We're like, oh, I'm uncomfortable with that. Who's in front of you? And he's like, no, that's my job. I'm always going to be in front. It doesn't matter like what you respond. I'm going to push out here in this direction. I'm like that. I got to ask him about that song Mother. And I'm like, was that meant to make me hate that song? And he's like, yes, it's about the mother. And he's like, the relationship. He's like, yeah, it's meant to do that. And I'm like, and so you have these things real, like, then all of a sudden my brain clicks into like the level. Look, incredible musician, right? I mean, obviously, but there's something above that I wasn't realizing. And you can see that when you understand, the decisions they make and when they pull it off. I'm a big U2 guy. And when Joshua Tree comes out, you realize this is a very important band, and they've done a lot. When they flip over to Octoon Baby, then you look back at the catalog and you're like, this catalog's even better than I realized, because they're doing things much more purposefully than we're realizing, and they're nailing it, and so you start to realize their growth, but also how good they were before. Like, I had to bring up their level of good on different things because they have the guts to try stuff. They purposely said, we're not going to have triumphant guitar solos, and reinvented all these things. And then you go, damn, these guys are really, really good at what they do.
Well, I mean, Eno is a hero of mine because for many reasons, but again, this is another guy who's a product of the British art school system.
Yep.
And so I think that when you have that kind of arty edge, it kind of makes you want to push things, in the studio and stuff. So yeah, he's somebody I look up to a lot. I think he's in all my books, actually.
Well, rightfully so, right? He's a wonderful artist. And I wanted to go back to Rodney Mullins, because when you think like an artist, you have to bring something that nobody else can see or realize, right? And he said, you guys realize this skateboard goes upside down on the grip tape side? Yeah, we can use that as a sliding surface. And you're like, what? Yeah, like, you don't have to put both your feet on top and just ride around on wheels. You can slide on this, and you're like, he does so many things. You're like, that's not possible, and incredible.
He's kind of had a second career too. He does like corporate speaking and consulting now in like Silicon Valley and stuff. So it's kind of interesting to watch him. I mean, he's a real genius. I mean, he's a neurodivergent dude. Like, there's a lot going on there. A lot of pain though too. Like a lot of like, his childhood, it seemed like it was very painful in a lot of ways. I loved the image of him. The thing I loved in the documentary was him talking about how he would skate. He always skates at night because he grew up in Florida, and that was the only time that you could skate outside on the concrete without sweating to death.
Right.
And then that become I just love this picture of this kid just skating from 2 in the morning to 5, just the dedication of that and the repetitive,
Yeah.
nature of
Constant
that.
failure, constant
Constant
negative
failure
feedback.
and
And it's like,
pain and,
yeah, right.
just really
Do
yeah,
you think
it's
about having to break his old man body down and like destroy all the old adhesions and everything in his body so he could get his body back?
yeah, that's a such just a god, it's like taking a like literally pounding his bones to
Yeah,
get him to move. It's like, oh my god.
yeah,
Yeah, that stuff takes a toll, man.
it does.
Yeah, that's the beautiful thing about well, although, we could talk I mean, Prince, that's the reason he was I mean, supposedly, that's the reason he was on such intense painkillers is all those years of going out in high heels and
Yeah,
going down to his knees and dancing. I mean, it does take a toll.
yeah. It
Definitely
exposes
does.
you to things that are outside of your control, when
Mm.
you get a little too much fentanyl in your life, and then all of a sudden we're like, we've lost this guy. This is a guy that should can get anything, right? So even if it's legal or not,
Yeah.
whether he's getting high or not is really irrelevant. Like he has access to everything. And when you don't sleep, some people don't sleep, but when you don't sleep like he does and you just create, you are burning the candle with the higher flame. Maybe not on both ends, but at
Yeah.
some point you have to learn how to do something else. And he wasn't a guy built for that.
Yeah, I mean, the only gift of Prince dying is that we get to know so much about him. I mean, there's been so much good stuff uncovered and written about him and all the stuff that's coming out of the vaults. I mean, one book I would recommend for Prince fans is Dwayne Tudol's books about Prince and what they are is they are these massive books that the first one is the Purple Rain era. So it's like probably 83 to 84, and it's just a day by day of what Prince was doing. And if you flip through that book, you realize this is a guy that would write a song in the morning, record it at night, all night, maybe do overdubs in the morning, the next morning, and then that was it. Like that was, and then he was doing something else. So he was just like, he was literally producing so much music that the record company was like, dude, we can't put this all out. He's like, okay, fine. So he makes these heteronyms. He finds he finds these other acts to actually take his songs. So you got the Time, you got Vanity Six, and all that stuff. I find that amazing. Just the sheer output in the 80s of Prince is it's just unbelievable. It really is it's Mozart level of output. It's crazy. It's hard to be a casual Prince fan. That's something that I found is like Prince is one of those people that like if you start reading about Prince too much, it's just like impossible to be casual about your fandom because it's so impressive.
It's on me. We haven't quite programmed it yet, but we're going to record an album fight with Purple Rain versus Led Zeppelin 2. And Purple Rain's never lost in the ring.
Oh,
Yeah. And that's a
well,
rare fight.
that'll be a
And
good one.
the thing is that when you, in this fight, when you've given your all and you get to the ninth song, there's Purple Rain waiting for you, which in its own right is this incredible song, right? That really it wraps that album up. It does everything, right?
Yeah.
But then, I don't know, and I tell it all the time, but it can't be told enough. Then there's the Super Bowl story where he's going to play
Yeah.
the halftime show,
Yeah.
and then he says those words, "Can you make it rain harder?" And you're like, and that's these are the things where like there is no obstacle between him and greatness. He is greatness, and it's just incredible.
Yeah, that would be a great one because what's the yeah, I think Purple Rain's because that Bring It On Home at the end of yeah, that'll be interesting.
Yeah,
Let
yeah.
me know when that's gonna happen.
And the amplitude of the song matters. So if the song like Purple Rain's a song that no longer belongs to Prince, it belongs to everybody, every teenager that feels that thing, whatever it is, right? Some
Mhm.
songs exit. And then you go against, yeah, a cover or a hey, let's get one more song on here. And so that typically is a knockdown round. So even if he's behind, he's so powerful in this ninth round because it's Prince at basically Prince's best. The title
Mhm.
track is the last song. That doesn't happen too often. I want to direct everybody towards your book, Steal Like an Artist. I'm going to put the link up here in a second. I just got to make sure I grab the right one. And we're talking to Austin Kleon. You can go to his website, and you should. All kinds of great things are there, his writing, his blog, and all those kind of things. Look, when you guys are trying to find ways to support artists like Austin, it's go to his website. It's buy the book of these things. This book is not that expensive. Buy 2 of them, give one to somebody else, and buddy read. That's the best way to go, quite honestly. If you want to support the Break It Down show, oh, well, this is easy. Go to breakitdownshow.com and go into the store. I'll put a link for the store on here, but I'll put it in the notes here in a minute. But you can buy a shirt. I'm wearing one right now. That's a Soundwave. By the way, Austin, this is inspired by the Joy Division album. That is a sound wave of someone's Down show. And I'm like, I want this to be, because I didn't want to do a 2-on theme, the vertical alignment with the the waves that they did in Joy Division.
Oh,
but this is what this is inspired by.
That's a fun idea for a series. Take the waveforms of like a song, and could you pick which song is which? You could do a little like, okay, here's 10 waveforms.
Yeah.
Here's 10 track titles. Can you match the track title to the waveform? That'd be fun.
Yeah. You edit a lot. You do get to start to realize what words are.
Like what? That's really fun. That's a really fun idea.
The other thing you can do to support the show, it's going across the bottom. You see it right there. That's the link to the PayPal link to support the show. Just put a couple of bucks in each month. Like, do a subscription. That's what I recommend. Look, $7, $100, 10, but whatever it's going to be is going to be great. Would you buy me lunch? Would you buy me a beer? This is what I'm asking you to do to help me pay for the show, to help me get these things done, and just provide a little bit of a living through all the hard work that I do. So I'll put those links in the notes here in a second, so you guys can click on them and do that. But let's get back to talking to Austin. One of the things, and look, really, we've kind of surreptitiously gone through this book, because a lot of the stuff we're talking about is in there. In the thing where RZA talks about always educating himself, it is the entry is school yourself, right? So there's that. But then another one that I found that I really wanted to get into was, I'm trying to do this in a way that works. Keep your day job, right? Some of these things, some of these endeavors, it's hard to make money in art, right? And if you think you're just going to jump out to the front, probably not. If lightning strikes, sure, great, enjoy it, but probably not. And then sometimes when lightning strikes, then it's over. And so you can have this moment of brilliance, and it's like, well, what's next? Like, oh, nobody cares about you anymore.
Yeah, this one's it can be controversial. For one thing, people don't want to hear it. I think it comes from my background of writing poetry. When I was studying a lot of the poets, there's never been a living in poetry. So most of the great, 20th century poets had pretty boring day jobs. You have like Philip Larkin's a librarian, Wallace Stevens is like vice president of an insurance company. T.S. Eliot was a banker until he found a patron. So the people I had always looked up to, even someone like Harvey Pekar, who I actually got to know a little bit in Cleveland.
That's crazy.
He had his job at the VA for 30 years or whatever, and that what happens when you decouple your income from your art is it just frees you up to make the kind of art you want to make. It takes your time, but it gives you a certain kind of creative freedom. Like, the question really becomes is like, how much freedom is a good thing? Because we wouldn't have Purple Rain if Prince didn't want to be a superstar. Yeah, and I don't know that he was in it for the money, but like there was a certain amount he was shooting for. I think Born to Run is another album kind of like that. It reminds me of it's like something's on the line here.
Yeah.
The kind of leap to, I think Born to Run's even a little bit more like a little bit more of somebody trying to really, really finally do it. Cause Prince had done some really good albums even before Purple Rain. But I like this idea of the tension between art and commerce. I mean, that's there in pop music, and it's there in all kinds of pop art, is that longing to be true to your own voice and your own impulses and your own art, while also wanting an audience and wanting to be mainstream and broad. I think that tension actually can create some of the really interesting stuff. People sort of want to set those up as choices, and like, oh, well, you're either a sellout or you're true to your art, And I actually think it's the tension between them that really makes a lot of the really good art.
The Yeah, it's great, that tension. You need that. You need to be able to withstand the growth to get to that tension, to get over the certain things. One of the first interviews we got to do was Sly Stone.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, it's crazy. And he had he's intermittent. His brain doesn't work all the way anymore, but
Right.
when he throws out a nugget, it's a nugget. You're like, wow. And so one of the things you said, we try to understand, like, look, doing a podcast, like how do you survive? There's 100 people that'll tell you how to make money, but their way of making money is by getting you to buy their course. God bless, go do that. But how do you actually make money doing these things? And it's not the things that everybody says. And when you realize the competition is living like this, here's what Sly said: if my music isn't good enough, I don't deserve to eat. Like, okay, I'm all in. And then Sly's like, no, you're not. No, you're not. No, you're not.
Yeah.
You have
Yeah.
cable? You're not all in, you know?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Talk about one of the great geniuses of
Oh, yeah.
music. I mean,
Yeah.
wow. Sly Stone, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, he or like, when Timmy Kelly got his shot, right? And Timmy Kelly's one of the most successful producers ever. They went to this guy's house. They drove on threadbare tires. They weren't gonna be able to go back. They really were burning the ships, right? And they get there, and the producer's like, "Well, here, go in my studio and just start working." And they didn't come out for days. He's like, "You guys are still in here?" And they're like, "Yeah, we're working," because they had that one shot, you know?
Yeah.
And if you're not ready to compete like that, then that keep your day job. Keep your day job and just work your way in. It's fine to work at your own pace, but don't think that you're going to outwork Timmy or Sly, because those guys are playing the game at a different level.
Yeah. And willing to put it all on the line, you
Yeah,
know? I don't
all
think
of it.
I don't think when I was younger I was too middle class for that. I'd grown up
Mm,
too middle class to
yeah,
kind of put it all on the line that way. So I sort of waited until it was viable. I just felt like, I think it also like the 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 pressure not to worry about being a full-time artist. I think taking that off also let me explore a lot of things when I was obscure and I didn't really know what to do next. You
yeah,
know, um, I think it can buy you. I think that in a sense, obscurity buys you a lot of freedom because you can really experiment and try a lot of different things without failing on a wide stage.
yeah,
I think some of the worst things that happens to artists is like really early success.
yeah,
Like, I
yeah,
think it's very hard to survive in the modern, like, it's hard now because a band can go very, like, viral with something before they even really play shows.
yeah,
So it's like it's interesting to watch who ends up having any kind of longevity at all, and by longevity, I mean, like, who's around for 5 years even.
right,
You
right,
know? So
yeah,
it's like, it's an interesting time. It's also interesting just in the way that containers for art and platforms, they just change over time. I don't think when I was a teenager, like, the idea that you could have a Substack and people would pay, and that was just so inconceivable to me, or the idea that you would the marketplace is always changing so much that as an artist you really have to, it's okay to look up to your heroes, but it's also, you have to understand what context they were operating in. And you have to be very clear about like what the business model was at the time. Because you can look up to Led Zeppelin, and you should, but you also have to know they were working in a very like different time frame and a different economy and marketplace and business.
yeah,
I think
yeah,
that happens to a lot of artists. It's like you look you look up to these people and they're your heroes and you want to live like them, but you realize like, well, they were living like that because of a certain context. Patty Smith is really good at talking about this. She's like, look, when I moved to New York, it was a dump. It was dangerous. It was dirty. It was cheap. That's why we were there. Like, it's not that now. Like, find
Yeah.
a new city. That was her like, big advice. Like, you got to find places where you can go and live cheap and make your art and do what we did,
Yeah.
or some version of it.
No, it's you can't do what they did. You can't go live in some crappy place in Laurel Canyon and write songs and
Yeah.
your neighbors be the Eagles, like that.
Unfortunately.
That day is past. You have to go do that somewhere else, right? And
Yeah.
that thing lives in LA because it's LA. Seattle doesn't have that kind of influence in the sound scene anymore. Athens, Georgia, for sure had a moment, but it
Yeah.
was a moment. You know,
Yeah.
I wanted to say this too about art. When you do have enough commercial success to do things on your own terms, because entering in, you're going to need someone's help. You're going to need their access, their network, their upfront money, and so they are going to absolutely fuck you, right? I mean, that's if you're successful, because they've got to do this 100 times, and so
Mhm.
we're going to take a piece of it. So we often look at these corporate guys, who sign acts like, I don't know, NWA, right? Yes,
Mhm.
you get fucked on the first 2, 3 albums. Major League Baseball players have to play for 6 years before they even get a chance to be a free agent, right?
Yeah.
Because all of the machine to break acts or to break out baseball players, it's expensive and you gotta pay for that.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Yeah. There's also the problem with success where, in the early days, like, people say no to you a lot,
Yeah,
and then you have to make sure that you keep people in your life that you can trust they'll say no to you.
yeah.
I always think that, like, George Lucas is a great example of that. Like, by the time even by the time Return of the Jedi hits, it's
Yeah,
like no one's saying no to George.
right.
And then
Not
with the
anymore.
prequels, it's like no one's saying no to this dude
Howard
anymore.
the Duck, I mean, there was no
Yeah,
need.
exactly.
And
Exactly.
and
So
and it's not just George, it's like Stevie Wonder. He makes incredible things, and you go on this run of album of the year, but you do get self-indulgent, and you don't have that person who can help you trim the fat. On the other side of that, when you do have that freedom that Stevie had, and in the same time frame, Willie Nelson drops Red-Headed Stranger, and he shows up to the label, and they're like, "Is this a demo?" And he's like, "Nope, it's done. By the way, contract says you have to publish it." Walks out the door, basically.
peace.
But
Yeah.
when you get into that album, you realize, that's a masterpiece, and a lot of people don't realize like anything about Redheaded Stranger or anything. But as soon as you dive in and you realize what he's done and created, a corporation hates that. They don't want to hear that. They don't want to see that thing. But then when you look at it as a full piece of work, that's one of the best albums that anyone's ever created.
I think that's, as I get older and I have my share of business dealings and I study more, the fact that this stuff ever came out is kind of a miracle. Every movie that gets made, to me, I have some friends in the film industry, and any movie that's decent at all, it's a miracle. It's a minor miracle. It's like
Every movie is a miracle. It's true.
there's just so many moving parts and, like, so much to it. So,
Yeah.
it's all the fact that we have any of these things at all.
You think about this, Tom Cruise jumps across 2 buildings doing his own stunt and breaks his ankle, right? He's able to continue filming, but if he has to shut it down, and it wouldn't be crazy to say 3 months to rehab, surgery, and
Right.
everything else, and he's a demon, right? He can
Right.
put the work in. Ving Rhames might legitimately say, "Hey, man, I got a project starting in, like, 4 weeks. I'm on contract." And now they're like, "Well, what do we do? We have to kill off Ving," like, it is hard, and this is the
Yeah.
biggest movies that they make.
Right. This
It's
is the
hard to get everything
most
lined up.
yeah, the most money, the most resources.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I do. And I'll go down to, like, I mean, like, every movie's a miracle, but, like, any, like, decent drawing is a miracle too, to
Mm,
me. Like, just any creative act, in a sense, is just kind of like when something appears that wasn't here before.
yeah,
I mean, just to have that kind of magic, you have to keep that
I love it.
you got to kind of keep that magic feeling, because I mean, it's so easy to get jaded, especially when you make creative work you're a living.
Yeah.
You gotta, like, remember that, like, there's an essential magic to something appearing where there was nothing before, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And so I really I try to keep that, it's hard, but I try to keep that magic in the back of my mind. Try
It's a
to wait
good
for it.
it's a good thing to have, though. I wouldn't even say top of mind because,
Yeah,
we always say, like, as a kid, you're an artist and you grow up and whatever. And there's all kinds of quotes about that where you lose that thing. And then when
yeah,
someone tries something, you should celebrate that, even if it's not the best thing or whatever else. Like, people often ask me, like, "Hey, would you listen to my music?" Because I've got a bit of an ear for that, and I know a lot of musicians. And I'm like, "Do you want my real opinion?" And then I'm trying to get away from that and just be like, I would, and figure out what the words are to say that are true to me and honest, and then maybe be able to provide some guidance. Or do I just say, you're singing flat. There's no reason for that. Just either work on some singing lessons or hire a singer and do these things.
yeah,
You're halfway there, but they did it. They created a song, and so
yeah,
I didn't want to smash that. But if they're asking, so we've got to find a way to be more celebratory and participative in these processes, because it takes guts to sing. Like, karaoke is one thing, is you can just laugh it off, but like if you record something and put it out, oh my god, that's so brave.
there's gosh, I'm trying to remember where I heard this, but, like, someone once said that with every creative act, there's, like, a sacrifice and there's a risk. The sacrifice is that you have to make a choice that this thing is going to be this versus something else. Like,
Yeah.
every creative work is like a series of choices. Like, you could think about a movie as like 1,000 different choices,
Mm,
over and over and over again. Directors talk about that all the time. Being a director is just making choices all day.
right.
So it's like that's the sacrifice. The sacrifice is that you could have done all these other things, but you chose this one thing.
Yeah.
And then the risk is that it might not work.
It might not work. It might be a little
You
hairy.
know?
Yeah.
So it's like a sacrifice and a risk. I don't know who I'm plagiarizing. I'm sad that I can't give the credit, but I always think about that. That every
Yeah.
creative act requires a sacrifice and a risk.
For sure.
And
Sure.
some of the best require the most sacrifice, the most risk.
And every work has its time to be in the creative phase, and then it's in the consumption phase. And like I do a live
Yeah.
show, right? And you were not able to pop right in right when I wanted you to. Okay, good.
See?
Who cares? Like, we've created this hour-long conversation. It's not a
Yeah.
point to point you out. It's just to say these things happen all the time, and there's times when I'm and not, and you work on getting better at those things. But ultimately, what's important is what we've created, this conversation, and it's a beautiful thing to be able just do this. And the great thing about these days is anybody really can do this, and you don't have to do it well. You just have to get over yourself and do it.
I wonder sometimes if podcasts are helping us discover the art of conversation. Like, I wonder if with all the so much of our life is through text and
Mm.
that kind of back and forth. I do wonder sometimes if
Yeah,
podcasts are helping us reconnect with what's special about just two people or two or more just talking, because there is a real art to conversation. It's a one plus one equals three type thing.
yeah,
You're getting something. You take two parts and you get something bigger than the parts even. And so I think about that a lot, actually.
yeah. When One of the reasons why I've developed a lot of skill in this is that I used to be a spy, and so I would go into places like Iraq and Afghanistan and talk to the locals. And one of the best questions I learned, and this is the art of the conversation, right? No one need look. I get proposed a lot of questions. Here's 100 questions. There's 100 things we like to find out about, right? And here's the questions we think you should ask. You have no fucking earthly clue what it takes to do that. You don't get
Yeah.
to say, and I always say this all the time on the show, where are the bombs? Where are the bombs? You don't get to do that because no one's
Right.
going to answer that question, right? So you have to just go in and with a different intention to say, hey, I just want to find out about you guys. I want to understand you guys. And by caring, someone might say, hey, Pete, which always happens because I don't ever ask for the thing that I want. I never ask for it.
Right.
And sometimes I don't ask anything. I can sit back with you, Austin, and just shut up most of this show. I mean, it's so interesting to have a conversation. We've been talking a lot, but silence is the best question. Or, hey, what's your opinion
Right.
on this? And then if I shut up when you give it, you might, especially if you're in a hard place, hard life, you might want to unload something. And that's what I collect, right? Is these,
Yeah.
but that's, you got to get to that lower level. You got to establish that
Yeah.
trust. One thing that you just taught me is that be mindful of the creations around me. So I'm going to try to work on doing that and just be more appreciative of art and what it is, whether it's, brutal freeway style construction or, whatever it is, and just look for it and then appreciate it, because it's easy to just walk around and not see any of it. But
Yeah. I think the trouble is we're doing triage all day. Like, I think that's part of the problem. There's just too much stuff. Yeah, there's just like too much stuff. And
yeah,
so, like, I think that's part of in the culture. If someone says something wrong now, I think people are so relieved because they're like, great, I don't have to think about that person anymore. You're out of here. You're
yeah,
out of the game. Because people are like so relieved to be able to cut things out now because there's so much. And we're
right.
up against this flood of information
Yeah,
all the time. And so I'm always trying to, a nurse in triage mode is not necessarily giving the best care.
yeah,
She's sorting out and trying to, stop the bleeding in a sense. And most great interactions with art are not where you're trying to like triage and stop the bleeding of your life. You're giving yourself over to something,
yeah, yeah,
and that takes a lot too. And that's what artists need to understand too. I'd say this a lot to other writers is, books are like crystallizations of energy at a certain
yeah,
moment in time. And then the only way that that energy gets unlocked is when the reader opens the book up and starts turning the pages, and puts their own energy into the book.
yeah.
So one has to always remember in the creative act that there's someone on the other side that makes the work sing, you know.
From talking to a lot of authors, one of the best compliments you can pay an author, and it should be genuine, of course, is, hey, I've read your book and I keep going through it because I keep finding new things. Page turner, yeah, like that's a great, as a page turner, I couldn't put it down. They all love that. But if you say I can't, like I have to keep reading it because you put so much in there, boy, that is like a compliment that puts them over the moon.
Yeah.
So I wanted to make sure I said that out loud.
Thank you.
Um, and one of the other things too is, and that is true for your book. That's why I wanted to say that. But the other thing I wanted to say, and I want to offer this to you as a way of looking at things. You've mentioned Venn diagrams a couple of times. If you scope back from a Venn diagram, you have an Euler diagram.
Oh, tell me about that.
So an Euler diagram is like, okay, so you have England, you have the UK, you have the Commonwealth, you have all these different things. You try to capture how they all fit into this organism, right? New Wave would be a great example. You have U2, you have Big Country, you have The Cure, you have New Order. You also have Joy Division and New Order. They're their own little Venn, right? And so
Okay.
you lead them all
Cool.
together into this segment. You can start to see things and you start to analyze. And look, you have to always do the work yourself. You can't like a Venn, you don't have to do anything. You just think about like these things are related. Scope that Venn back and figure out what else is adjacent and maybe in this like a giant square of it, and you start to like New Wave. Van Halen has new wave songs, especially when they first came out, because they were in the scene and not everything worked for them. And those aren't their best songs, but they are a legitimate new wave act.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, Euler diagram.
Euler. Yeah. Euler's a genius. Anything you can learn about Euler, you'll get smarter. He is the father of all math.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I will research that later this
I
afternoon.
know. He's a fascinating dude. He
Very
invented
cool.
he invented everything.
All
Um,
right.
Anything in closing? I mean, I'll have 100 other things to talk about, but I don't want to.
Oh, thank you for this time. I mean, if anyone thinks this stuff, if you liked the music talk earlier, I'm, as you can tell, I'm kind of a magpie. So, my weekly newsletter is something that I always recommend to people. It's free, and I always recommend 10 things I'm into that week, and that's one of my favorite things I do. That's what a lot of people know me for, other than my books. So, check that out. That's on the website.
Yeah, and then there's the link for the book, and then again, there's the website. You guys, it's also just look in the comments. You'll see I posted all that stuff earlier. All right, let me shut this thing down. Stand by for 1 second, Austin. I'll come right back to you.
All right.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to. Curated